So when I say center pleasure, what I'm really saying is center collaborating with partners to co-create a context that makes it easy for your brain to interpret sensations as pleasurable. So what's that context going to be? For sure, connected, good relationship stuff. For sure, for most people, it's going to be lower stress. For most people, it's going to be feeling really good about your own body. It's going to be being able to disconnect from the parts of yourself, from your identities and roles and obligations and responsibilities that are antithetical or disconnected from your erotic self. So many people talk about being touched out as a parent. So being able to release yourself from parent identity and transition into hey, sexy person identity, like that's a process that takes time. And usually you have to go through rituals in your life to transition into that bubble where your brain can focus on sensations and interpret them as being pleasurable and sexy.
Welcome to Therapist Uncensored. Building on decades of professional experience, this podcast tackles neurobiology, modern attachment, and more in an honest way that's helpful in healing humans. Your session begins now with Dr. Ann Kelly and Sue Marriott.
I always feel kind of bad that I'm not one of those people who carry huge jugs of water around trying to stay hydrated. But I also know that hydration is one of the most basic principles of healthy living. However, even good water habits alone doesn't always do the trick, which is why 3 of 4 people are not properly hydrated. I just can't drink those neon-colored sport drinks that are full of sugar and who knows what else, which is why I'm really into this new product called Cure. That's C-U-R-E. They come in these cute little packets that I stir into my water, and they're enjoyable enough that I even stir them into my iced tea. Cure is an oral hydration solution that is as effective as an IV drip for dehydration. It's based on the science as recommended by the World Health Organization. It's the real deal. Hydration goes beyond just drinking water. It's about replenishing the electrolytes we lose through stress, travel, sweat, alcohol, illness. Water alone isn't enough to do the job. That's why you need to try Cure, the electrolyte drink mix that tastes as amazing as it makes you feel. For Therapist Uncensored listeners, Cure is offering 20% off your first order. Stay hydrated and feel your best by visiting curehydration.com/TU and use promo code TU at checkout. That's Cure Hydration, C-U-R-E, hydration.com/TU. And again, use the code TU for 20% off your first order. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Therapist Uncensored. I am here with Dr. Emily Nagoski, and we're going to have a blast. I already know it. How about we just start with you describing yourself for the audience?
I'm Emily. I use she, her pronouns. I am 48 years old and perimenopausal and have long COVID, but I've been a sex educator for 30 years. Talking about sex is my absolute favorite thing to do in the whole wide world, especially when we can bring the science to it. And I've written 3 nonfiction books. Come As You Are is my first one. Burnout, which I co-authored with my twin, which is about stress management. And the most recent one is Come Together, which is about sex in long-term relationships, which I wrote because of how much writing my first book about the science of women's sexual well-being screwed up my sex life.
And part of why I sought you out and invited you on is, we're in this period of incredible stress and messaging, and we're wanting to put out material that is good for people, that helps us basically manage and that teaches us something. So this combination of sexuality and preventing burnout and boundaries and sex and pleasure seemed perfect. How about we just start with your most recent book and your story that you just almost said about how the first book ruined your sex life, and so you needed the second book.
Yeah. So you might think that writing a book about sex where you're reading about sex and writing about it and talking about it and thinking about sex all the time would be like super sexy. Turns out, no. I was so stressed by the experience. It was my first ever book. For all I knew, it would be the only book I ever got a chance to write.
But it's a New York Times bestseller.
it, has done really well and sells more every year as people are like, oh, this science explains everything that I have ever wondered was happening with my sexuality, and I need to give it to my friends, and therapists using it with their clients. The biggest surprise for me is the way therapists have adopted it as a tool to help people who are struggling with their sexual well-being. There's actually a Come As You Are workbook specifically because therapists asked me to write one. Because, like, not everybody wants to read 100,000 words of, like, kind of affective neuroscience. And for the people who are like, I don't need to understand why, just tell me what to do, there is the Come As You Are workbook. But yeah, I was so stressed out while I was writing the book. And I was a newlywed. We got married in 2012. I started writing in 2013. And it got bad. Then I finished the book and things got better. Then I went on book tour and it got much worse. So I would try to follow my own advice of responsive desire. People often think that desire is supposed to be just spontaneous and happen out of the blue. But in long-term relationships, the reality is that most often you have to organize childcare. You have to make sure you've both got time off. You've got to get yourself in a good state of mind. And then you just put your body in the bed. You let your skin touch your partner's skin and your body goes, oh, right, this is a really good idea. I like this person. I like this. What a good idea this was. So I would try that. I'd put my body in the bed. I'd let my skin touch my beloved partner's skin, and I would cry and fall asleep. And I was like, I need different advice from what I give in my own book. So I did what any good sex nerd does. I went to Google Scholar. And I looked at the peer-reviewed research on how couples sustain a strong sexual connection. And what I found there was that the entire cultural conversation about sex in long-term relationships is not incorrect, but just wrong-headed. It starts in the wrong place. The conversation is generally, oh, intimacy is the enemy of the erotic. You need distance to keep the spark alive. And other people saying, no, intimacy is the foundation of the erotic. You need closeness to keep the spark alive. It turns out when you actually talk to people who sustain strong sexual connections, who self-identify as having extraordinary sex lives, they don't talk about spark. Desire, spontaneous desire, barely squeaks into the top 10 characteristics of optimal sexual experiences. Desire is not the thing. And when desire is our goal, increasing desire for sex, we are on the wrong path toward having a great sex life. Instead, we should be moving toward pleasure. And when I say it this way, it seems like, oh, duh, obviously. And yet it comes as a revelation to say it is not dysfunctional not to want sex you do not like. Differential in desire is the number one reason why couples of any gender combination seek sex therapy. And a lot of these couples show up in their therapist's office. And if their therapist asks them to describe, tell me about the last time you had sex, is one of the questions Ian Kerner asked. Peggy Kleinplatz, a therapist and researcher in Ottawa, will ask, so tell me about this sex you do not want. And they are not describing pleasurable, laughing, connected, authentic, joyful sex. It is dismal and disappointing. It is sex by rote. It is sex where they feel like they just have to go along with what their partner wants without being able to express or even necessarily knowing what it is they themselves want.
Yeah, maintenance sex. Is that?
So maintenance sex is sort of like, do you like that sex? Great. Is it maintenance sex because you're just having sex at a frequency that somebody told you you're supposed to be having it at and you don't like it? A couple I talked to while I was writing the book, I did not talk to the couple. I talked to one partner because they destroyed their relationship. They read somewhere the average frequency for couples having sex, which is a number I do not say out loud, because there's no way for me to say it without everyone judging their own experience against that number and deciding whether they're okay or not okay based on the statistical aggregate of a bunch of strangers.
And is that number, do you trust that number?
What I know is the number is irrelevant to how any individual lives their lives. And if there's a couple that's having sex more frequently than you are, that's having sex more frequently than you think is typical, and at least one of them does not like most of that sex, do you want to be that couple, or do you want to be a couple that has sex much less frequently than you think is typical, but both of them just love every second of it? Which couple would you rather be? The frequent couple or the ecstasy couple? I want to be the ecstasy couple.
And is that realistic? The ecstasy couple?
Yeah. So pleasure, when I say center pleasure, it sounds sort of simplistic, but pleasure is actually fairly complex, which is where the affective neuroscience comes in. First of all, let's make sure we understand that there is a difference between pleasure and desire. Liking and wanting are neurologically distinct in the brain. The wanting system, this is Kent Berridge's research. He's like the main guy, and there's a whole bunch of other researchers who follow what he does. The wanting system is this vast dopaminergic. Can you hear Shelley in the background?
Shelley is welcome to join us.
Shelley's 18, and yelling is her favorite hobby. So she is the queen.
It's music. This is background
Right.
music, so she's welcome.
The last
She's
person I
welcome
talked to was like, Shelley represents our intrusive thoughts. That's not wrong.
That's good, actually.
So wanting is this like huge dopaminergic system. It takes over large swaths of the brain, and it's about like, I want that. Ooh, I want to go get that. Ooh, seek exactly. It's seeking. Pleasure is these tiny hedonic hotspots that overlap with the wanting system, but like you gotta like hit these spots just right. And there's a thing called the affective keyboard of the nucleus accumbens shell. Like, how nerdy do we want to get?
I love it. We got a lot of nerds listening, so
it tunes itself to your larger emotional context. So if you are feeling connected and loving and supported and sexy and already into things, and your partner tickles you, even if you don't like tickling in general, like your brain might experience that sensation and be like, oh yeah, ooh, yeah, I like that.
That sound is so great. It's exactly how it feels. That sound is how pleasure feels.
One of my strengths as a sex educator is my particular brand of autism is that I have hypersensitivity to neuroception and interoception. Like my body will not stop telling me how it feels. And that often comes at, so the evolutionary function of a voice is to communicate an emotional state. My sister is a professional musician. She's a choral conductor. And so I have learned a lot from her about what voices are for. And I benefit from my body being really clear about what my state is. So when I think about pleasure, it's easy for me to be like, pleasure. Oh, yeah. Because my body tells me what pleasure feels like when I ask it. And then you think about like, okay, so that exact same partner, but instead of feeling connected and supported and loving and already a little sexy, you're in the middle of an argument, or you are changing the baby's diaper, you're wrist deep in baby poop, and your partner tickles you. How does that feel? Like, as one student of mine once said, like you want to punch him in the nose.
Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not so good. It's the same sensation, but because your larger emotional context in your brain is different, that affective keyboard tunes itself differently, and it interprets the same sensation in opposite ways because of the emotional context. Does that make sense?
Total sense.
So when I say center pleasure, what I'm really saying is center collaborating with partners to co-create a context that makes it easy for your brain to interpret sensations as pleasurable. So what's that context going to be? For sure, connected, good relationship stuff. For sure, for most people, it's going to be lower stress. For most people, it's going to be feeling really good about your own body. It's going to be being able to disconnect from the parts of yourself, from your identities and roles and obligations and responsibilities that are antithetical or disconnected from your erotic self. So many people talk about being touched out as a parent. So being able to release yourself from parent identity and transition into hey, sexy person identity, like that's a process that takes time. And usually you have to go through rituals in your life to transition into that bubble where your brain can focus on sensations and interpret them as being pleasurable and sexy.
I'm thinking about larger context and this is where your other book also comes into play, right? Of the messaging that we're getting from our leadership and safety, just the issue of safety, the feeling safe.
Yeah, safety is so complex and important because, on the one hand, globally speaking, a lot of us truly are not safe. A lot of people, for a lot of different reasons, marginalized identities, living in a world where they're not sure they can continue living in their home, where if they walk out the door, they're at risk for physical violence. In their home, they're at risk for physical violence. Like a lot of people are not safe. And if you're not safe, that's not a context where your brain is going to interpret the world as a safe, fun, sexy, pleasurable place. So in Burnout, there's a chapter on connection. Amelia and I call it the bubble of love, where you create as many connections as you can with people who care as much about your well-being as you care about their well-being. Notice I did not say who care about your well-being as much as you care about your well-being, because especially if you got raised as a girl, you got taught that your well-being doesn't matter. So you need people around you who are like, screw that mess. You matter. And if you get home from a long and difficult day of work and you're feeling exhausted, nobody's going to say, oh, you're home. What's for dinner? They're going to say, you look so exhausted. You go take a nap. You have a shower or a bath. Come on down when you're ready. We'll have dinner ready and we're going to sit around and talk about our feelings. That's the bubble of love, is when people notice that you have a need in the same way you notice that other people have needs. Not everyone in our lives is that person. Most of the people who are good enough to be in our lives want to be a person like that and are willing and able to learn how to notice that you have a need and meet it without your having to beg them or cry for it.
That's what I was going to ask you, is if somebody, due to culture, weren't raised that way, just aren't. They're the human, I think that you talk about human givers and human beings, and they're just human beings.
In Burnout, we followed Kate Mann's book, Down Girl, which was followed up by a book about men called Entitled. She uses the language of human beings. So I am fortunate enough to know like what my job on earth is. I'm here to teach women in particular to live with confidence and joy inside their bodies. But we've reached a point culturally where I think women can't make much more progress with that until the men in our lives, our fathers, our brothers, our spouses, our friends, our sons, until they catch up with the progress that we have made. And so I had to find language that recognized the ways that men too struggle, they suffer under the patriarchal gender binary. So in Come Together, based on what I heard from men, I came up with the term human winners. Your job is to win, to fight and win, to fight and win, or else you're a loser. To be confident always.
I
to
love
be
it because it
strong.
captures the pressure. Because even if you win, somebody's trying to knock you off. That's stressful.
Yeah,
Yep.
you can never stop fighting. And how dare you ever stop fighting? Real men don't need to rest. They don't need sleep. They don't need to be held. They never feel lonely. Whatever gender you were raised as, you were taught that you have permission to access some of the emotions inherent in living in a mammalian body and not others. If you got raised as a girl, you were taught that like sometimes you can feel sad, but you are not allowed to feel angry. Men, on the other hand, the only emotions they're granted access to are winning, horny, and angry. You're not lonely, you're angry. You're not lonely, you're horny. You're not sad, you lost. You're a loser. And when the cultural context through which you interpret your own internal experience is that limiting, you go desperately long years, decades without having basic needs met. Loneliness is a biological hunger. We sicken and die of loneliness as massively social creatures. And so men struggle in ways that are different from women, and ultimately they end up, it's complicated. It's not a competition. Everybody suffers under the patriarchal gender binary.
Well, yeah, and can you say more about the gender binary?
I sure can. Boy, there's only 2 topics in Come Together that are so complicated they require 2 chapters. One of those topics is the most complex affective neuroscience I've ever tried to describe in a book. That is Jaak Panksepp's 7 primary process emotions. You said seeking, so I know you know what I'm talking about. And I use a metaphor of an emotional floor plan to help people get a sense of like how to navigate what all their emotions are and how they relate to each other. The other topic that took 2 chapters to describe is what I call the binary mirage, which is this idea that we as white colonial cultures have been taught is like there's 2 sexes and 2 genders. And biologically, there are not 2 sexes. This is a thing that has been pretty well established in the science since, for sure, since the 90s. And I have an appendix, in case you're like, but biology, Emily, there's a whole appendix just for you. Anyone who's like, but aren't there just 2? Nope. And there's also not 2 genders exclusively. We know this because across history and prehistory and around the entire globe, there have existed cultures with more than 2 genders or less than 2 genders. That's how we know there's not just 2, is because everywhere you go around the world, Christian missionaries have had to fight against the populations whom they invaded to be like, no, there's not 5 genders, there's only 2. Like, we erased a lot of the gender diversity that used to exist on this planet, just like we've erased a whole bunch of things. And the damage that this idea that there's only 2 has done, it's not just that we have been taught that there's only 2. We've been taught that you are one or the other of those. You must be, because there's only 2. And there's only one right way to be that particular gender. So human winner, for example, always confident, always fighting, always winning, always ambitious and driven and a provider. Whereas human givers have a moral obligation to be pretty, happy, calm, generous, and attentive, unfailingly attentive to the needs of others. And if anyone falls short of their moral obligation, because it's a moral obligation to perform your gender correctly, you deserve to be punished. And you will be punished if there are people around you. And if there's not people around you, you're probably just going to go ahead and beat the shit out of yourself.
Oh, man. Isn't that true? No. And what about this new edict that has come down that you are, from our leadership, that you are the gender at conception, which isn't even scientifically.
Yeah, there is no gender at conception.
unless we're all women, unless we're all female, right? We start out.
Right. At conception, the default is like, you're going to develop female anatomy, which is the like internal reproductive cells. That's what being female technically is having a very small number of really large gametes. That's being female when you look at what it means to be an animal who reproduces sexually. And being male technically is producing sperm or producing a large number of very small gametes. So the male seahorse, this is the classic example, gets impregnated by the female. He ejaculates into the ocean, and those sperm find their way into the egg that got deposited into his abdomen. What makes him male? He's the one who produces the sperm, and that's what biological maleness is. So, yeah, so there's what's determined at conception, it's worth saying out loud for so many reasons that 2/3 of all fertilized eggs spontaneously do not make it to the end of the first trimester. I mean, everyone I know who is a parent has spontaneously lost a pregnancy early. And I want to normalize that so that people who want to get pregnant have a realistic sense of like what is happening in their body or their partner's body and what the likely like I am in favor of let's create the category a little bit pregnant. Like if you get as far as like a pregnancy test is positive and your doctor says you're pregnant, what they're saying is you've got at this point a 2/3 chance, like you've made it through the difficult part. You got a 2/3 chance of getting to the end of this first trimester, and you're a little bit pregnant right now. And like things happen, but also this category of a little bit pregnant creates space where almost all of the abortions in this country happen. If we can recognize, and if you are a God person, and you recognize that when sperm meets egg, 2/3 of that don't make it to the first trimester. And I struggle to understand how a just and loving God would terminate 2/3 of all human life before it even gets to 10 weeks of gestation. So I feel like if we recognize, I went off on this tangent of reproductive cells because we were talking what it actually means biologically, categorically to be male versus female anywhere in the animal world. And that's related to these reproductive justice issues. And we can create space for people not to be so, I'm going to use the word dictatorial about like when sperm meets egg, that's when God created a life. Okay, then God is killing 2/3 of us before we ever make it to 10 weeks of gestation. You can believe in that God. That's okay. So sex could be XY chromosomes. Sex could be the genitals that you have on the day you're born. The adults around you look at those genitals and they go, it's a boy or it's a girl. And then there's the intersex people, which is somewhere between like 1% and 5% of births. And generally doctors are just like, we're going to make our best guess. And that's a whole big conversation. But we know the existence of intersex people is evidence that even anatomically, there's not just two. And then there's secondary sex characteristics, which vary tremendously. And then there's the relationship between all this meat that we have, like the meat and water and electricity that makes up a body. And then there's the identity of that human, which may match the one they were assigned at birth. It's a girl. You get raised as a girl and you grow up to feel comfortable in the social and psychological identity of woman. And then there's other people like my identical twin. I'm a person who got raised as a girl and I feel real comfortable in the identity of woman. When people call me by she, her pronouns, I feel like good. That feels like a little fizz of like, yes, that's who I am. My identical twin is agender. When I got misgendered, we were traveling together for work. The flight attendant misread us as Mrs. and Dr. Nagoski, so I was Mr. Nagoski, which felt just like so uncomfortable for me. And Amelia later told me that they were jealous. They wanted to be misgendered because they didn't feel comfortable. Like when someone said she, they had to work really hard to be like, oh, right, that's me. I'm a she. Yeah, I'm a she. And then it wasn't until like 2019 that they even learned that agender was a thing. And I felt like a dork because I'm a sex educator and like I could totally have let them know.
Well, say more about agender versus non-binary.
Well, so agender is like a subcategory of non-binary. There's a lot of ways to experience your gender as non-binary. So these are all under the trans umbrella. Some people are raised as a girl and at some point in their life, maybe really early, maybe not until far into adulthood, they're like, no, mister, I am sir, I am he, him, not girl. That was all wrong from... and then there's other people who are raised as boys and and at some point in their life, maybe really early, maybe not until late into adulthood, they're like, turns out, not a boy, woman, girl, woman. And then there are people who at some point in their life are like, not this and not that. And some people who are like, not this and not that go, neither thing. Gender is not a thing for me. Gender is not part of how I live my life. I would like a gender neutral pronoun. And they is Amelia's experience. And then there's gender fluid people who are like, not this or that, but sort of all over, day to day, varying in my experience. Some days I feel really deeply into he, and some days I feel really deeply into she. And I just want to walk around in the world in a way that is going to look super ambiguous to people. And they can call me they or different pronouns that people prefer. So like gender fluid is like all the genders, maybe not all at once, but sometimes all at once. And agender is like no gender for me, please and thank you. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And I'm so, so happy to be talking about this.
And they have always existed across history.
Yes. Two spirits, like, yes.
Yes.
100%. And they need love right now.
Yeah, because their existence is being legislated. Their ability to exist on a public street, to access medical care that they very often require, to be legally protected in their identity at work, to not be fired for their identity, to be able to get housing and not be kicked out of their housing for their identity, to be able to find support services if they're teenagers and their parents kick them out of their house. People under the trans umbrella are much more likely to experience homeless, violence of all kinds, including being victims of sexual violence.
Hey there, it's been a while since I've talked to you all about one of my very, very favorite sponsors. And favorite because they've been around for a long time, but also because they are literally so incredibly useful. I'm talking about ZocDoc, which is an app and a website that you can go to. This costs you nothing, $0, zero investment, and it's so easy to use. It basically, no matter what you're looking for, you can look for an immunologist, you can look for a psychiatrist, a therapist, a dentist, women's health practitioner. You can filter for example, gender affirming or trans, or let's say you have a high BMI and you're anxious about finding a medical practitioner that you're anticipating that they're going to fat shame you. You can put all of these filters in. And then what you can do, let's say you pull up some people, then you can compare them directly. There's a picture there, of course, but there's also, most importantly, patient reviews. And the reviews are real. It's a service more than a product. This is a service that I highly recommend. Bookmark it on your computer, download the app, ZocDoc.com/TU, and be sure and put the TU in so that they know that we are helping people find it. ZocDoc.com/TU. All right, thanks.
I'm really jazzed about our sponsor, Peak Nandeca. I literally drink it every morning. Sue can attest to that because I love the way it makes me feel. When they reached out to be a sponsor, I was a little skeptical because I'm not a coffee drinker, but I had really been curious because my caffeine intake had gone up and up and up because I was really craving that kind of alert focus that caffeine gave me. But I was feeling bad, too much jitters. I didn't like it. So I was really curious about this. And I can tell you that I really love it. It increases my focus, clarity, and my metabolism. I can feel the difference when I drink it. It's a slow release caffeine from probiotic fermented teas and mushrooms. They're functional mushrooms and they add cacao to enhance cellular function, and it works to balance the stress response, but it elevates my mood and my focus. And one of the fun things is that this new year, I have really wanted to get off any processed foods. And so as a side note, since I'd been drinking it regularly, I put it into assessment in AI, like, is this a processed food? I've been doing that a lot and been surprised how much things come back as processed. This was not. It is fermented tea that's triple toxin screened. So it really has unmatched purity and the fruity body mushrooms. The quality is excellent, and I loved getting an outside confirmation of that. So right now you can get 20% off plus a free starter kit when you shop exclusively at peaklife.com/TU. So that's PIQUELIFE.com/TU, Peak Life.
As somebody that was raising gay and, in a same-sex relationship, raising kids way back before it was a thing, I think my oldest is 26 now. So that was a long time ago of doing that. And I remember, doing the rallies and protesting and talking to legislators about my right as a parent and trying to protect my kids. This goes so much further than that because it's about, it's like your soul. It's like trying to take your soul. And they need a lot of love. We need a lot of love. Like, I don't even want to say they as a not including myself, but just right now, it's scary. It's really, really scary.
For a trans person to be visible right now is to put their actual life in danger. They don't need validation. They need access to the basic resources that a cisgender person like me takes for granted. I went yesterday and I got a mammogram. If I'm a trans woman whose breasts exist because I've had access to hormone therapy so far, my experience getting a mammogram is going to be really different if I don't know for sure that the medical providers I encounter are going to understand my needs and experiences as a trans woman.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then even that being legislated, being able, I'm in Texas, and you can get, as a parent, turned into CPS, Child Protective Services, for supporting your non-binary child. It is so dangerous.
Soul crushing and heartbreaking. It is so dangerous. And I've been doing this work. My first training around trans issues was in 1999. So we're going on 25 years. And I have watched for the first, 16, 20 years of that as rights expanded and visibility exploded and access to care and all of the standards of care for trans people became more and more patient-centered and driven by patients explaining what they need instead of doctors telling them what they needed and the procedures they had to go through before they were allowed to have access to get surgeries that a cisgender person would be able to walk in and ask for. Electrolysis, hormone treatments. I'm perimenopausal. Hormone treatments have saved my actual vagina. And it was easy. My OBGYN looked at my vagina and was like, wow, Emily, your vaginal rugae are really flat for a 45-year-old woman. I'm going to prescribe you some estrogen. Girl, thank you. I didn't have to ask. I didn't have to feel sensitive about it. And everyone with a vagina, however their vagina came to them, deserves to feel just as comfortable and confident with their OBGYN. Basic medical services, not being discriminated against in housing and work, being able to move to states where they do not feel targeted so that they can feel safe. These are like basic life needs that trans people have. And I think one of the really powerful ways that cisgender folks like me can support trans folks is to dive really deep into our own ideas about our gender. Like, what are the ways that our access to emotional needs, to basic survival needs, to personal ambitions was limited by the way we were living according to the rules of our gender and by the way the world was treating us based on our gender. I love the exercise of writing a letter to your 13-year-old self about how you were taught you were supposed to be as a gendered person. 13 is this really vulnerable age. How you were taught to be a gendered person and the ways that interfered with your life, the ways it enhanced your life, the ways you fought for the right to be your gender the way that felt right for you, and the right to access things that you were told people of your gender weren't allowed to access. If you got raised as a boy and you identify as a man, but you were taught that you're not allowed to cry because real men don't cry, what the fuck are you, a pussy? Are you a pussy? The worst thing you can be is a girl if you were raised as a boy. And if you struggled through that and you found a person in your life with whom you could lie on the bed together and hold each other and sob together over a loss, you have overcome something massive. And recognizing that you did that, recognizing that you were trained in a gender and you overcame it, you'll have this tiny taste of what trans folks experience. And you'll be able to create more space in your heart for the trans people who are being targeted so directly. And it will enhance your own personal life. It will free you from so much garbage that is just interfering with your access to pleasure. Because, I mean, like, men get taught to perform, women get taught to put on a show for and please men. Like, if you get raised as a girl, whoever you end up being as an adult, that was the role that you were trained in. And overcoming that stuff gives you access to much better orgasms, better sexual connection, and it means that if you are a parent or if you are an adult in a child's life, you'll be able to talk to them about gender and sexuality without the shame that you were probably raised with, the silence that you, if you're anything like me, you were raised with. My mom is great. My mom has done a lot of really wonderful things in my life. Back when we were in the 8th grade, it was like 1989, 1990. And Amelia and I were still using gay as a like, that's so gay kind of way. And my mom in 1989, 1990 was like, we don't use that language. That's inappropriate. Like, she's great. She's done so many good things. And when I was about 11, I guess I read the word vagina in a book at the library because driving home from the library, I asked my mom, what's a vagina? I don't remember what she said, but I remember the flush of embarrassment and confusion that happened in her body. Again, that is just normal and how most people are going to respond when their 11-year-old asks them what a vagina is. So when I got home, I looked it up in a medical encyclopedia, and that taught me what it was. But my mom's reaction taught me how to feel about it. So if we can do this work on ourselves, we can prevent ourselves from transmitting quite as much of it to the next generation. Not to mention, it'll make our sex life so much better.
I love that. And I like also getting into some of the more tactical stuff, just so that our listeners can like, okay, what do we do? What are some suggestions, again, from both the boundary piece and the pleasure? Does anything else come to mind that is like a concrete, here's what I would advise, or try this, or?
If you have young people in your life and you drive them places, captive audience, talk to them about condoms, contraception, and consent. Talk to them about gender identity, your gender story, how you learned that you were supposed to perform your gender and how some of that has worked for you and some of that really hasn't worked for you. And by telling your story, they're sitting there going, oh, geez, can you just not? But you are creating space in their brain for them to start thinking about like what they're hearing. When you watch TV shows, with your partner and with the young people in your life, talk about the way gender is represented. Can you believe all of the women on the show are all wearing skirts above their knee? Like, why don't the women wear pants? Women in real life wear pants, don't they?
Right. You're teaching them, you're pairing like how to feel about it.
Yeah. Noticing the patterns and teaching them not to be blind to it, to notice it, and recognize that it is an injustice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that. And what about stress? Just to kind of dip in there for a moment. You've done a lot of work on stress and how you have some tactical stuff about that. And the world is stressed right now. And these trans folks that we're talking about are under extreme stress. So talk to us about stress.
So the first thing to know is that there is a difference between ways to deal with the things that activate the stress in our bodies and the ways to deal with the stress itself. So I've been talking about ways to deal with the things that activate stress. How can you support the trans and non-binary people in your life? How can you work on yourself to reduce the gender mirage in the ways that it has been poisoning you so that you can liberate yourself, which will help you to liberate. My dogs are wrestling and playing and it's real cute, but I need you to be quiet, pups.
But you know what it's like that thing is related to race. Like I didn't know I had a race right? So
Right.
that, like, realizing I have a race, and then
Oh, whiteness.
right, totally. So the same thing. It's like realizing I have a gender story, even, like those kinds of like ding.
Yeah. In the same way that white parents need to be talking to their white kids, cisgender parents need to be talking to their cisgender kids. Well, as far as they know, cisgender kids, about how gender has impacted them, because it absolutely has, and not just the women. Cisgender men need to be talking to their cisgender, as far as they know, children about their experience of gender. And that, just talking about it, is by itself, for men in particular, a violation of the rules of being a man. So they're already doing something radical and essential. So those are some strategies for dealing with the thing that causes the stress. But then there's the stress itself, which is a physiological activation of what, for shorthand, I'm going to call the fight or flight response, though we know there's so many more F's than that. Fight, flight, freeze, flop, fawn, that all live in different places on the vagus nerve. And once it gets activated, you can't just like shut it down. Your body has to complete the stress response cycle. Once it gets activated, it has to move all the way through. You have to allow it to move all the way through you. And there are, oh, my puppies.
Oh, it's totally good. Yeah, we talk about the amygdala hijack. So that's kind of what you're describing, right? So it takes over, and then what?
So Peter Levine uses the example of animals who are sedated in the wild to be like tagged or given medical treatment or something like that. As those animals come out from sedation, and it actually happens to humans coming out from sedation too, the state you were in when you went under is the state you will come out. And so these animals will shake and shudder and that is their body going back into the fight or flight response and moving all the way through it until their chemical response fades and they can return to their baseline state. That's the complete stress response cycle. When I was writing about this, a friend of mine was like, my child had to be sedated for a minor surgery. And when he came out from under, he was kicking his legs like he was riding a bicycle and his arms were flailing. And he was saying, I hate you, mommy. I hate you, mommy. I hate. And like, he was just in a super activated stress state because he was scared. Because he was scared when he went under. It was an emergency surgery. And so he was scared when he came out. And that is normal. And my friend, such an amazing parent, she just held him and said, I know, honey. I love you and I'm here. Oh, I love you, honey. I know it's scary. I love you and I'm here. And then they walked to the car hand in hand. And when they got home, she went into the kitchen and hugged her husband and sobbed. Because her body also needed to complete the stress response cycle. So physical activity is the single most sort of efficient strategy, but that's not available to everyone. Amelia, my non-binary twin, is physically disabled by long COVID so that like she can't walk from a parking lot to a store. She uses a wheelchair. So physical activity is not available for them. Instead, fortunately, there are so many others. Crying is one of my absolute favorites. Laughter also, especially laughing with other people. And I don't mean social laughter, but the sort of like helpless, painful, I'm about to pee
in your
kind
pants,
of laughter. Yeah. Menopause.
Yeah, the trampoline was not my friend. Like, what is happening to me?
Yeah, genitourinary tract. Everything changes. Estrogen cream. So we have physical activity. We have sobbing, just like really. And some people, I have always found it really easy to cry. Amelia really struggles. They had to learn from a therapist how to cry, how to like notice the sensations and allow them to happen without trying to shut it down. Laughter, ditto. Connection with other people, feeling held and safe. When I was talking about the bubble of love, John Gottman talks about like the 20-second hug. It's not about the number of seconds. It's about putting your arms around someone and having them put their arms around you and holding each other until you feel the shift in your body, where your body goes, oh, I'm safe. When I'm with this person, I am safe. this is a person I can feel safe with.
And I love that exercise because it's not just, you hold one another until you both feel it, which is so lovely because, you're in the, quick hug, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, we're supposed to do this thing. And there is something, it makes me think of the bubble of like, it's actually a shift. It's a neurological shift.
It is it's real. It happens in your body. It's not like just a feeling, whatever just a feeling means. It's a physiological state shift. My husband has been gone for 4 days and I'm already like, when he walks in the door, first thing that's going to happen is a hug until both of our bodies, like, because each of us has had to hold the fort wherever we were. And we're both like, we're just got to get through this until we can be together again and help each other. And like my body's already craving that connection. Oh, Olive. Oh, there's a squirrel outside in the snow. Speaking of which, connection does not have to be with other human beings. Human beings are real complex. Dogs, not so much. Playing with your dogs absolutely changes your state. I had a shelter dog I adopted. He had been in the shelter for like 4 or 5 years and was profoundly traumatized from the experience. And I found that the necessity of me tuning my state to be what he needed from me, to be like calm and relaxed while he was panicked and unsure, it trained my nervous system to have access to what polyvagal theory developer Stephen Porges calls a ventral state, where I felt safer and more connected because what my dog Green Bean needed from me was for me to feel connected and safe so that he could know that he was safe and I was there for him and I was going to make sure that none of that stuff ever happened again. So it doesn't have to be with other people. And it can also be a spiritual connection with the divine. Being held by a loving God is an experience that for a lot of people meets that same physiological need of feeling safe inside your body in this moment. Even if the world is not a safe place for you to be, if your body is not in a safe place, you know at least that your body is a safe place for you to be. Your body is not itself a source of danger. And so many of us got taught to feel afraid or ashamed of our body and its needs, and to instead turn toward our own bodies with kindness and compassion and curiosity and a sense that like whatever you have going on inside, there's nothing you can experience that is dangerous to me. Does that make sense?
It makes so much sense. I loved earlier you called it, something like a bag of meat and electricity.
Meat, water, and electricity.
Meat, water, and electricity. And that's all we've got. And to love it and take care of it and listen to it.
It's the only thing we have on the day we're born that we still have with us on the day we die.
And thank you for your example with your husband. Right. Again, it's like the real thing. This isn't just an idea like what you talked about earlier about writing about it, but then also getting separate from it. And that's what certainly we try to do here is like, this isn't y'all go out and do this thing, but we're all in it.
It's
and
us.
It's very, very hard.
Yeah. I really hesitated before I started writing Come Together because like, am I undermining my authority as an expert if I acknowledge that I have struggled in this way? But I started talking about it with my literary agent, and she was like, Emily, do you know what a relief it is for me to hear that you also struggle with these things, knowing all the things you know? And I was like, yeah, it's not undermining my intellectual knowledge and my ability as an educator to recognize that I too live in a body that is susceptible to stress and exhaustion. And like I learned about this science that I put to practice in my actual life, and it worked. And why would I not share that? And if you're wondering, hey, Emily, did Writing Come Together do the same thing to your sex life that Writing Come As You Are did? Heck yes. Heck yes, it did. It absolutely 100% did. But this time at the end of it, I had this, 100,000 words, this manual for how to fix it. And like the best thing I can say about the book is that we use what's in there. My husband, we actively talk about like, hey, remember in chapter X, this idea, like here's the thing that I'm experiencing right now. And things are better for us than they have been in all our, I think it's 14 years together now. It's different because our bodies are different and our lives are different and the world is different. But the quality of our connection, and above all, my ability not to take myself so freaking seriously, has freed up a lot of emotional energy for connection and pleasure and laughter and joy. If you know Jaak Panksepp's work, you know about the play space. To be able to laugh. Dorothy Sayers is a interwar novelist who had her crime detective guy say, the only sin that passion can commit is to be joyless. It must lie down with laughter or make its bed in hell. There can be no middle way. If you can laugh while you come, that is the ultimate
That's
joy.
the pinnacle.
That is like, it's not about simultaneous orgasm. It's not about like doing acrobatic anything. It's about really being able to surrender your body to pleasure and joy, which is first requires creating a context where your brain has access to those sensations. And you collaborate with your partner to figure out what that context is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you have a revolutionary, it sounded revolutionary podcast.
Yeah. So in the middle of 2019, I was looking at what the next year was going to hold. There was going to be a presidential election. And I was like, it's going to be rough. So I asked if Amelia would make a podcast with me, which we called the Feminist Survival Project. 2020 was way worse than we anticipated, like than we could ever have anticipated it would be. But we stuck to our resolution of ending it on Election Day, 2020, which we did. And then the 2024 election happened. And like, look, I'm a sex educator. You don't know my politics, but like, you know my politics. Very shortly after that election, Amelia texted me and said, we should start the podcast again. And I was like, I'm not ready. I am still crying every day. I wake up in a panic thinking about who's going to die and who I can save. Like, it's dark and bad. And they were like, that's why we need to start the podcast again. So the Feminist Survival Project is back up. It's the zombie apocalypse edition, we call it. So both of us are feminist. Both of us are on the autism spectrum. For being in what I might call the wellness space, we have a very particular approach where we're in no way optimistic. We do not lean away from the difficult, hard things. We wade deep into the dark, difficult things and are like, how do we cope given this? How do we actually survive? We have an episode called Stronger Than the Fire, where we talk about, like, we can smell the smoke. Like, we didn't start this fire, but like the building is burning. What do we do now? What we need to remember, there's a Rumi poem, and as a 21st century middle-aged white lady in America, of course I relate so hard to a medieval Sufi poet, Rumi. He writes, not all of us can sit down in the fire like a salamander or like Abraham. We need intermediaries. But a lot of us, especially those of us who, I'm going to call it create content, are the ones who are sitting in the fire. And I am not a Bible girly. I had to look up who Abraham was. And basically, the king ties him up and sits him in a fire. He sets him on fire. For 3 days, Abraham sits in a fire. And an angel sits on his shoulder, and the fire burns away the ropes. Because if we hold on to whatever counts as our faith, even if it's our faith in humanity, we are stronger than the fire, but the ropes are not. This fire is what will set us free if we can hold on to our hope, our faith, our love.
It's beautiful. It is. I could see it as a primary job is hope, like finding it, keeping it, cultivating it, sharing it, letting it be contagious. It has to. There's no choice. That was so beautiful. What you just described, and I'm going to take that with me. I'm going to listen to your podcast. If people are interested in finding you, where do you want to direct them?
Most important thing is the books themselves, which the audiobooks are my favorite version of all 3 books. Amelia is a professional musician, so they wrote music for all 3 of the books. I just found out this week that Come Together got nominated for an audiobook award. No sex book has ever won. I don't think I'm going to win, but like it is thrilling to have made
That is
the list.
very
Yeah,
exciting.
it is.
Wow.
So even for people who are like, I'm not going to read 100,000 words, audiobook, and available at libraries all over. If you request it from your library, then they know to order it. So I love when people get the books out of the library. I am minimally on Instagram at Nagoski, and I'm on Blue Sky at Emily Nagoski. I set timers for 30 minutes a day on those because that's as much as I can tolerate before getting sucked down the dark rabbit holes. And then Feminist Survival Project, Zombie Apocalypse Edition.
Well, we are going to put all of those things in the show notes, and you can find those at therapistsuncensored.com, and you can just put any of this. We have a search button, and this is going to be so great. And I feel healed a little bit in this conversation. And
I do too. Getting a chance, this stuff, I feel like it's important and it helps people. And whenever I get to talk about it,
it makes a difference. It really makes a difference.
We talk about meaning and purpose in Burnout and how essential that is for moving you forward when you're doing well and sustaining you when things are difficult.
Can you say more? Because I remember about that. So, so what's the difference between meaning and purpose? And
so meaning, sometimes the research is really not helpful because it includes the word meaning in the definition of meaning. So we call it connecting with something larger than yourself. Your something larger could be like a mission to change the world. It could be like making the world a better place for these kids. It could be creating a home that nourishes the spirits of everyone who comes in the door. It could be like whatever your thing is, when you connect with your something larger, you don't have to do it every single day. But it's great if you can do it every week, and really important that you do it at least once a month of connecting with. It could be a spiritual something, like going to religious services once a week is the thing that connects you with your something larger. Serving the divine could be your something larger. It nourishes us and strengthens us because humans are not, Jonathan Haidt a long time ago called us 90% chimp, 10% bee. We are a hive species. An individual human alone is not a complete life. We require connection with others, not necessarily other humans, but with other animals, with nature. Is it the forest or the beach or the mountains? Is it the desert? Some landscape you can connect with that will make you feel connected to being a living organism on this earth for a lifespan that we don't get to control. And when you are doing well, it is profoundly nourishing. Like it's leafy greens in terms of life experience. And when you are struggling, I'm going to go to a dark moment here that we talk about in the book. After the liberation of the camps at the end of World War II, a journalist found a basement where a Jew had been hiding for the duration of the war. And on it, this anonymous person had written, "I believe in the sun even when it's not shining. I believe in love even when I don't feel it. I believe in God even when he is silent." It got turned into a song called "Even When He Is Silent," that if you look for it on YouTube, you'll find many performances, and it is art. Art can do things that sustain us. But that's an example of the ways we can stay connected to something larger than ourselves that sustains us even through the most dark and difficult times that humanity can create.
And that's different than purpose.
No, I think purpose,
they're the same.
Yeah, is just not the word that researchers use technically. We found the research, like we try to make it so research-based, and the research is kind of terrible when it comes to like the happiness research. It's not real high quality stuff necessarily.
Well, I'm very excited to dive even deeper into many of these resources that you've shared. And I know that our audience is delighted with this information. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you all for listening all the way through this incredible content. is free and available to everyone. And our purpose, like yours, is our meaning and our purpose is to share this kind of information, make it accessible, make anywhere around the world where you can find this kind of inspiration. And if you appreciate that, we would really love for you to share the show, to rate and review us. That helps other people find it. And that's it, really. That's all we're asking for the moment. Thank you again. It's been an honor.
Absolutely, truly my pleasure. Thank you.
Therapist Uncensored is Ann Kelly and Sue Marriott. This podcast is edited by Jack Anderson.